Hello, and welcome to Talk 3 in this series on the Sermon on the Mount, Digging Deeper. And we're digging deeper this time into the time of the Maccabee and the Herods. Following on from the last talk, we see that all changes had consequences. People had different opinions concerning the changes and reacted differently, and a variety of factions grew up, hence political life became chaotic and at times violent. Militarily, one of the most serious and damaging was the Maccabean Revolt, which developed into a civil war. As well as the Maccabean Revolt, this period also saw the Hasmonean and Herodian dynasties founded, both of which caused serious unrest and had political implications well into and beyond the time of Jesus. These things would impact the listeners to the Sermon on the Mount, either directly or indirectly. But let's take things in order. Around 330 BC, Alexander the Great had captured Jerusalem, but treated it with great respect. He worshipped in the temple, according to the direction of the high priest, and the high priest read to him part of Daniel's prophecy that a Greek would defeat the Persians. One quote, "Then a mighty king will arise, who will rule with great power and do as he pleases. After he has arisen, the empire will be broken up and parcelled out toward the four winds of heaven." If you want more, try Daniel 7, Daniel 8 or Daniel 11 and you'll find it. The Jews were also allowed to follow their own laws and customs during the time of Alexander. But the consequences of his death were momentous. The Jewish circumstances changed drastically, and following the prophecy, the empire was parcelled out. Ptolemy was given Egypt to rule, which shouldn't seriously have affected Judah, but he took Jerusalem by deceit. On his way to Egypt, he entered Jerusalem on the Sabbath, ostensibly to worship, but in reality to capture it. The devout Jews were not willing to take up arms on the Sabbath in order to keep him out, thus, quote, submitted to be under a hard master by reason of their unseasonable superstition. So said the less devout Jews, who were happy to have fought Ptolemy. When he had taken a great many captives, both from Jerusalem and the areas surrounding it, the mountains of Judea, Samaria, Mount Gerizim, where the Samaritan temple was, he led them into Egypt and other of his territories, where he settled them as slaves, but often with given responsibilities. This was the beginning of the great diaspora of Jews, as opposed to the Israelites, who of course were spread out widely by the Assyrians 300 years earlier. Ptolemy soon recognized the worth of his Hebrew slaves, as Nebuchadnezzar had done with his slaves like Daniel and his friends, and placed these people in high positions. In Alexandria, for example, some were given high positions in the library, where they were instrumental in translating the Hebrew Tanakh into Greek, the first translation of the Hebrew scriptures. Judea, thus, although officially independent, was under Ptolemaic influence until about 200 BC, when the Seleucids became its overlord. Jerusalem fell under the control of the Seleucid Empire, following the Battle of Panium, in which Antiochus III defeated the Ptolemies. Antiochus III, known as the Great, lived from 222 BC to 187 BC, and he was reasonably popular with the Jews. But things changed rapidly when his son, Antiochus IV, took over in 175 BC. And now we get the lead up to the Maccabean Revolt. Several things happened. a series of events occurred which led up to physical contact and conflict. Firstly, Antiochus IV delighted in a name he'd given himself, Epiphanes. This inflamed the Jews, as Epiphanes meant God manifest. He forbade the observance of the Sabbath and of the traditional feasts. He forbade the reading of the law of Moses and gave orders to search out and burn any copies that could be found. He forbade the practice of circumcision, for it was this that set the Jews apart from other people as the one people of God, the chosen race, and he wasn't having that. In 168 BC, Antiochus invaded Jerusalem and desecrated the Holy of Holies in the temple. This was the only place on earth about which Yahweh had said, "My name," the expression of his person, "shall be there." See 1 Kings for more on that. He then insisted swine be sacrificed on the altar in the temple. On December the 25th, 167 BC, he had the temple rededicated to the Olympian god Zeus. Antiochus placed his image all around the inside of the temple, which was left deserted for several years. Its ultimate cleansing is celebrated by Jews right up to today in the Hanukkah festival. The immediate cause of the wars occurred when Mattathias, the Hasmonean, a rural Jewish priest from Modin, the home of the Maccabees, sparked the revolt against Antiochus and the Seleucid Empire by refusing to worship the Greek gods. Mattathias killed firstly a Hellenistic Jew who stepped forward to offer a sacrifice to the idol on his behalf, then secondly killing the officer demanding he do the homage. He and his 5 sons fled to the wilderness of Judea. You can read all about this in the book of Maccabees in the Apocrypha. A year later, after Matthias' death in 166 BC, his son Judas Maccabee led an army of Jewish dissidents to victory over the Seleucid dynasty, and a guerrilla warfare began, with the Maccabees having a double enemy. The Gentile enemy, this was Antiochus and his supporters, and secondly, the Hellenized Jews, of whom there were very many. These people largely supported the Gentiles, and it was a large, influential group. These wars of so-called independence, led by the Maccabees, ran between 168 and 164 BC and involved large numbers of the population. On one occasion, Judas took 8,000 men to Gilead to battle, while simultaneously his brother Simon took 3,000 into Galilee. The war became in part a civil war, as all non-Orthodox Jews were treated as conspirators, the enemy. The Maccabees destroyed pagan altars, images of Greek gods, and other Hellenizing artifacts in the villages. They circumcised boys and gathered a force of loyal Jews to fight. The apocryphal books of Maccabees give detailed account of the wars, and some of the stories linked with it, which will be available to the people listening to Jesus. They would also know many of these stories. By the end of the fighting, the Maccabees concluded a treaty with Rome, who had occupied the surrounding areas but left Judea independent. So what's all this to do with the Sermon on the Mount? Well, this is their background, their history. The listeners to Jesus would be coming from this background. Which group would you support? Whose side are you on? How do you feel about Orthodox Judaism, about Hellenization, about the prophecy in Daniel? These were all pertinent questions. Plus the fact Jesus had to be very careful to tread a delicate line and relate to these feelings. One example of this, of course, is when Jesus was questioned about who should you pay your taxes to. He didn't answer it in the straight way. He knew the balance between the supporters of Rome and those who didn't. So you give to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. So the answer to these questions would determine to a degree how they saw Jesus and his message and what response the individual had to Jesus. Equally, Jesus would need to be aware of these points in his ministry and his teaching. As we will see in the Sermon on the Mount itself, gently covers some of these issues. The Hasmonean dynasty. Politically, the Maccabees won the wars and went on and founded the Hasmonean dynasty, which ruled Israel independently from 167 BC to 37 BC, or even 4 AD, depending on how you measure, being a fully independent kingdom from about 110 to 63 BC. They asserted, or reasserted, the Jewish religion, partly by forced conversion. They expanded the boundaries of Judea by conquest, taking over Transjordan, Samaria, and Idumea, Edom. They reduced the influence of Hellenism and Hellenistic Judaism. The Hasmoneans also dominated the office of high priest, with mixed feelings among the people. They had 4 high priests and 8 rulers during their time, including Herod and his wife, who was a Hasmonean. Some high priests were good, others not so, but they did cause much controversy. One high priest in particular also took on the role of ruler at the same time, which was strictly forbidden by Hebrew law. Equally, there had been trouble with Antiochus, who insisted he could appoint the high priest. This period included murder in the temple and Gentiles being appointed as high priest. It was during these years that the Pharisees and the Sadducees were formed. The former to particularly oppose the Hasmonean high priests because they were not of the line of Aaron. As the Pharisees grew in number and significance, they increased in their opposition to the Hasmoneans. This was not a period of peace and tranquility. It was this civil infighting that partly led to the ultimate Roman invasion and takeover in 63 BC. With the arrival of the Romans, in 37 BC, the Herodian dynasty began. Herod's family were Edomites who lived in Samaria. You'll remember that the Maccabees had captured this land and brought it in part of a larger Judea. By this time, Samaria had been brought under Jewish rule. The Hasmoneans conquered the Edomites, who became Jews. Hence Herod could, and did, claim to be a Jew by religion, if not by birth. He was also married to Mariam, a Hasmonean, a marriage of convenience to help his claim to the throne. Herod the Great was a Roman client king from 36 to 4 BC. Appointed king of the Jews by the Roman Senate, he ruled the whole of Palestine as a puppet king. His prime job was to keep the peace for Rome. He ended the Hasmonean dynasty, the Maccabees, and killed the last of the male Hasmoneans. As well as his cruelty, Herod was known for his prolific building projects, including renovation of the Second Temple, the Tomb of the Patriarchs, Caesarea Maritima, the Masada and Herodian fortresses, among others. In keeping employment high and people with a job, he, to a degree, kept the people happy. Equally, he could be brutal and cruel. Two incidents took place at the end of Herod's reign, and it is very difficult to decide who was responsible: Herod the Great or his son Archelaus. Which one was responsible for the events? There was a period at the end of his life when Herod the Great was too ill to rule, and Archelaus took over. And two things happened during this time. Firstly, an attempt was made to put a golden eagle at the temple entrance. The eagle was smashed. Judas and Matthias incited their pupils to remove the golden eagle from the entrance of the temple, as, according to the Ten Commandments, it was a sin to make idols. The teachers and their pupils were taken and burned alive. Secondly, the one we know well, the massacre of the innocents in Matthew chapter 2, verse 16. Some Jewish scholars had discovered that 76 generations had passed since the creation. And there was a well-known prophecy at the time that the Messiah was to deliver Israel from its foreign rulers in the 77th generation. The story about the slaughter of the infants in Bethlehem is the second chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, is not known from any other sources, but it would have been totally in character for the later Herod and his son to commit such an act.